I'm Vince Dziekan. I'm sort of, I guess, a bit of a newbie, shall we say, to the museums and the web community. But what I'll be doing today is hopefully playing the curatorial role, which is, I guess, a bit of a dual role, the idea of actually sort of framing the next two presentations, which will be taking place, and as Nancy indicated, we'll actually try to make those highly interactive and also give people a chance to sort of move around and stretch their legs, and also to try and get out of the way as quickly as possible, which I think is important. So I was asked to kind of put together a bit of an opening discourse for this, and to then sort of move towards the presentations that Sarah and Kathy will do directly in relation to 3D and immersive exhibition technologies. I think most people who've been around for the last few days have had plenty of opportunities to, I guess, be exposed, if they weren't already, to a range of different types of exhibition-based applications of digital technology and a range of new medias. And of course, one of those highlights is the work that's available to everybody here in terms of the Pure Land exhibition, which I know Sarah's going to go into in more detail. But I just, in framing the presentations, I sort of grabbed this quote, which I thought was quite interesting in relationship to that work, as it says below, the future of digital preservation, cultural heritage interpretation, which have both been very strong foci of the last 2 days and today, but also this idea of embodied museology. And that's where I think the idea of exhibition and exhibition-based practice is particularly interesting to speak about. And I'm conscious, I guess, of that issue of talking about this sort of notion of embodiment and site-specific exhibition-based practices, while we're ostensibly talking about this idea of museums and the quote-unquote web. This topic is something that I, as a researcher, have been involved in. I'm an independent curator, specializing in sort of new media art, and also in terms of articulating that form of contemporary art practice and looking at the implications that that has more broadly on the whole museum-based apparatus. And in terms of the book, which I had the opportunity of soft launching earlier this year in San Diego at Museums in the Web, titled Virtuality and the Art of Exhibition, I kind of structure that book around a series of interlacing themes, which I guess could be considered maybe the DNA of the type of, I guess, kind of issues and literacies that we're working with today. And the thing that I'd like to just kind of use as a way of framing the next two presentations is thinking about the space, in a sense, that's created in between in terms of this diagram that kind of sits there sort of between these ideas of, virtuality and the art of exhibition, the contemporary kind of context that we see in terms of the multimedial or the distributed museum, and particular kinds of practices that take place within that new context, ideas that I put forward in the book around curatorial design as a particular method of negotiating this. But in the middle zone, this sort of space that sits somewhere between spatial practice and digital mediation, and how in that space in between, a lot of conversation over the last 3 days has kind of moved in and sort of flowed back out of that space. And so I think the two presentations that we're going to see and the projects that you will have a much more intimate chance of, I guess, engaging with will also be particular ways of actually approaching and playing within that space. I'm going to go really quickly through a couple examples, because again, it's much more important, I think, for us to look at the primary source kind of examples that both Kathy and Sarah will be talking to, rather than sort of giving you a whole bunch of other stuff. But I think it is interesting to maybe just kind of very quickly look at 3 touchstones in terms of contemporary practices that take place, perhaps more in the electronic media arts or the new media art field, but also how this hybrid space of digital technology does means that sort of art, design, architecture, those disciplines actually do very much kind of rub up against each other and create new configurations as a result. So for those of you who did have the opportunity earlier this year to be at Museums in the Web in San Diego, you would have had a great opportunity to actually experience a A really, I guess, kind of, I don't know if quintessential is the word, but a really sort of interesting instance of contemporary media-based practice, that being Isaac Julian's 10,000 Waves, which is a highly immersive, very, very sort of critical, in fact, exploration of the cinema form, but also the way that that sort of idea can translate into exhibition space and how exhibition practice works. Now, Julian isn't alone, of course, in working in this area. There are a whole range of movements that have taken place, even going back from the 60s onwards. So we're talking about, 50 years worth of practice where we start thinking about ideas around expanded cinema. We think about sort of the cinematic image becoming spatialized, and we see that happening in a variety of ways. A very, very contemporary example of Doug Aitken's Altered Earth project, which is actually referred to in the promotional sort of accompaniment as an earthwork. Christian Marclay, whose work in terms of the clock, which received sort of the highest accolade at the Venice Biennale, again is about kind of deconstructing the language of cinema and creating a whole different type of viewing engagement with a 24-hour artwork. And also going back to kind of earlier examples of new media art practice with Art Plus Calm's The Invisible Shape of Things Past, which really embodies effectively the virtual camera, and how this actually has become a project for them that spans at least a decade of moving sort of from, in a sense, the virtual or the simulated image into highly augmented, embodied, physical installation experiences as well. So Art Plus Calm is one particular, I guess, kind of, example to look at, because we're actually talking about effectively a group of artists led by Joachim Sauter in Berlin, whose work and practice has actually spanned 25 years. There's 25 years of knowledge that has actually been sort of built up, exploring and playing with both the media forms and the changing technologies, but also the way that that can become spatialized and put into exhibition contexts. I would highly recommend the book. That's a monograph that's been put out recently that actually spans that 25 years of practice. And what Art Plus Calm as practitioners have done is actually trace, again, a trajectory that goes from, I guess, effectively an illustration of understanding the digital terrain, this idea of digitalization that goes back to their earliest sort of practice, into what we could say today is becoming a post-digital practice as well. And I don't know if people have experienced the mobility installation that was part of the Shanghai Expo, but they actually responded in a sense to the proliferation of screens and audio-visual kind of environments by actually creating a really, really considered, quite minimal in fact, work that actually used all sorts of programming and technologies to play in a very, very different way that kind of moves outside of maybe that paradigm. And other examples for people who may have been UK-based, United Visual Artists are again a London-based sort of practice that spans the art arena, spans the design arena, and has increasingly moved, in fact, into permanent architecture as well. So we're not just talking about the digital being this ephemeral and temporary thing anymore, but actually architectural, I guess, kind of manifestations that are meant to actually sort of exist in time and across time. So UVA's High Arctic, which actually was the opening installation at the newly opened wing at the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich, is again a very, very interesting example of a highly immersive, multi-form kind of exhibition experience, highly participatory, probably a little bit more into sort of the design side of the equation than the art side of the equation. But interestingly, these practices are hybrid, and they do move across those spaces very, very fluidly and basically get on with the practice of playing with the forms of both technology and exhibition. And I think that's probably the best segue, keeping to Nancy's mantra of being short, sharp, and hopefully not too shocking, to hand over to our two presenters. So the idea for the remainder of this session is that both Kathy Martin and Sarah Kenderdine will do 10-minute presentations to kind of frame and sort of act as a bit of a précis to their particular projects. And then the idea is that over a bit more of an informal opportunity to actually engage with both of them in their work. Sarah, in terms of sort of the e-cloud, which is outside, and Kathy, who will actually kind of be able to continue her presentation or show her work here in the context of the lecture theatre. So thank you, and we'll hand over to Sarah first, and then to Nancy.